From the first crack of rope against bark, Clara May Hollis knew the plains had turned against her, the cottonwood's wide trunk cold on her spine, and the wind dragging dust into her mouth as if the land itself wanted her silent. And when she said, "Please don't do that," it came out small, a child's sound lost under cicadas and the creak of leather, while Isaac Rourke stood close enough she could smell horse sweat and iron on him, his shadow cutting across her ribs as he tied the last knot with hands that had once lifted her down from a wagon like she weighed nothing, hands that trembled now not from fear, but from the long habit of doing what had to be done, because in West Kestrel County the sun did not wait for mercy, and neither did men with deeds in their pockets. He kept his eyes on the rope as if looking at her face might crack him, and she searched his jawline for the man she thought she knew, the one who spoke to cattle like they were kin, and laughed soft when rain came early, the one with a wife whose name she never said out loud because it felt like stepping on a grave. The cottonwood's leaves hissed overhead, green coins clinking against fate, and Clara felt the ache set into her shoulders where the rope bit, felt her breath shorten, felt the land measure her the way it measures everything, by what it can take. Isaac's horse stamped nearby, a patient brown with a white blaze, and beyond it the grass rolled unbroken to the horizon, gold as a promise never kept, the sky wide enough to make a person feel judged. He stepped back, and for a moment the world hung between them, the silence so thick she could hear the blood in her ears, and she remembered the night he'd found her at the creek, wrists raw from a man who'd wanted her quiet, how Isaac had knelt and cut the binding with his knife and said nothing, just handed her his canteen and looked away while she drank, and how that silence had felt like a vow. Now the silence felt like a sentence. "Isaac," she said, trying his name like a prayer, "you don't have to." And he flinched as if the word had struck bone, because he did have to, or he believed he did, because Sheriff Calder had ridden up that morning with his lawman smile and his ledger of debts and his talk of examples, and because Isaac Rourke owned land by ink and sweat and a marriage that was more contract than comfort, and because the county watched him with a measuring eye, waiting to see which way he would fall. He took off his hat and wiped his brow, revealing the pale scar along his hairline from a bar fight years back, a reminder that he had bled for less than this, and said low, "I won't hurt you," which was the cruelest promise of all, because hurt had already arrived and was making itself at home. Clara's thoughts ran the way deer do when a fence appears too late, leaping and catching and tearing, remembering her mother's hands braiding her hair by firelight, the smell of coffee grounds and wet wool, the road that had brought her here, the way Isaac's wife Eleanor had looked at her from the porch last Sunday with a face made of weather, a woman who knew what it cost to keep a place and paid it anyway. And Clara wondered if destiny was a thing chosen or a thing assigned by men who pretended not to choose. Isaac circled once, checking the knots with a rancher's care, muttering to himself about time and shade as if these details could redeem him, as if the cottonwood's mercy could stand in for his own. And when he stopped in front of her, she saw the fight in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to cut her free and ride until the map ran out, and the part that counted fences and seasons and the quiet expectations of a woman waiting at home. "They're coming," he said, not looking at her face, "and if they find you gone, they'll come for me." And she almost laughed at the simplicity of it, the way men put their lives on scales and forget what weight looks like, because what he meant was that the land would eat him if he refused, and she had lived long enough to know the land always got paid. A hawk cried somewhere high, and the sound pierced her like a blade, and she felt the sun climb, felt sweat trace her spine, felt fear turn into a steady animal inside her chest that told her to breathe and wait and watch, because survival was a craft you learned with your body first. Isaac's wife had a face that could close like a door, Clara knew, and a patience that could stretch a man thin. And Clara wondered if Eleanor knew what was being done in her name, if she would forgive him for this, or if forgiveness was just another story men told to make nights pass easier. Isaac mounted his horse, the leather creaking like an old apology, and leaned down once more, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, lines made by sun and squinting into distance. And he said, "I'll come back before dark." And she believed him and didn't at the same time, because belief was a habit too, and habits were what kept people standing when the ground shifted. As he rode away, the dust rose and hung in the air, and the cottonwood's leaves whispered 1,000 small judgments, and Clara held herself as still as she could, counting breaths, listening for hooves, knowing that between now and nightfall the world would decide what she was worth. And somewhere beyond the grass a figure moved at the edge of sight, a rider or a memory she could not yet name, and the rope tightened as if to remind her that fate did not ask permission. It only waited to see who would break first. Night came the way it always did on the plains, without apology, the sky bruising purple, then black, while Clara May Hollis counted the hours by pain and memory. And when the rider finally emerged from the dark, it was not Isaac Rourke, but Sheriff Calder, his silhouette sharp against the stars, his voice smooth as oiled law when he said her name like he owned it, and the cottonwood seemed to lean away as if it knew what men like him did when witnesses were scarce. Clara's mouth was dry, but her mind was clear, because fear, once spent, leaves room for resolve, and she watched Calder dismount with a smile that had never learned shame, his boots stirring dust that would settle into history by morning. And he spoke of order and examples and how the county needed, reminding who held the pen and the rope. While she thought of all the times order had been another word for theft, he reached for the knots, not to loosen them, but to test them. And when he did, the horse behind him snorted and shifted, and Clara saw the second rider then, a darker shadow separating itself from the black. Eleanor Rourke's posture unmistakable, even at distance. Straight-backed, hands steady, grief braided tight into purpose. The kind of woman who could look at a wound and decide whether it would fester or heal. Eleanor rode in close and said, Calder's name with the weight of a verdict, and the sheriff turned, surprised in a way men are when they forget wives can be more than furniture. And in that breath, Isaac's horse thundered back into the clearing. Isaac riding hard as if the night itself were after him, the reins cutting his palms because he had decided too late, but decided all the same. Words collided, accusations like sparks, Calder's hand drifting toward his gun, while Eleanor's voice stayed low and sharp, speaking of ledgers and bribes in the body found last winter by the creek, the one Calder had closed with a shrug and a stamp. And Clara understood then that the rope was not just hers, it was a line drawn across the county, and men were choosing sides whether they knew it or not. Calder drew first because men like him always do, and Isaac was faster because he had been slow once already today, the shot cracking the night open and echoing off the cottonwood's bones. The sheriff falling into the dust with a look of confusion that would never resolve, and the silence afterward was immense, the kind that presses against the ears and asks what comes next. Isaac dismounted and cut Clara free with shaking hands, the knife slipping once, twice, until the rope fell and she folded forward into his chest, not in forgiveness but in the simple human need to stand. And Eleanor watched without flinching, her eyes taking in the marks on Clara's wrists, the truth written there in red and swelling, and something in Eleanor's face softened, not into mercy but into understanding, the kind earned by living through the cost of other people's decisions. They buried Calder before dawn, shallow but honest, because the land does not keep secrets forever. And when the sun rose, it painted the plains gold again, as if nothing had changed, as if men had not crossed lines that would echo for years. Isaac stood with Eleanor and Clara at the cottonwood, the three of them bound now by a different rope, one made of consequence, and he said he would ride to the circuit judge and tell it straight, because lies were heavier than chains, and he was tired of carrying them. And Eleanor said she would sell the north pasture to pay whatever came, because a place built on blood was already lost. And Clara felt something like a door open inside her chest, not toward romance or rescue, but toward a future where she chose the road. She left that morning with a borrowed horse and a canteen, the plains opening wide as they always had. And as she rode, she did not look back, because survival had taught her that some chapters end by moving on, not by turning around. In West Kestrel County, people would talk, and some would say justice had finally found a spine, while others would mutter about troublemakers and women who knew too much. But the cottonwood would stand, and the land would remember. And if you listen close to stories like this, told slow and true the way the Western Tales tells them, you'll hear the lesson under the wind. That destiny is not a thing that happens to you. It's a choice you make when the rope is tight and the night is watching. And as this story held you, if it made you feel the dust and the cost and the courage it takes to choose right when it hurts, then ride with us again by subscribing to the Western Tales, because there are more roads ahead, and every one of them carries a story worth hearing.